Welcome to my AEP 880 Module 10 over Safe Schools. For this module, we had to read a variety of different articles, including 4 given to us within the module. Here are my article summaries. The first article, 3 Essential Priorities for School Principals, talked about, the 3 essential priorities that principals should consider when structuring their school environment. The first thing they need to do is build a positive school culture where students and staff feel valued. They should create a sense of internal leadership by giving staff members lots of roles to take on. This will reduce principal workload and create a feeling of valuedness within their staff. And then lastly, they should make connections with community members. This will help them better understand their demographics and maybe give them more leads on how to help students. The second article said How Feeling Respected Transforms a Student's Relationship to School. They noted that reducing suspensions increases graduation rates for all students, but particularly minorities. They said that students thrive when they feel respected and valued, and that giving them small affirmations throughout the day can make a huge difference with a struggling student. They pointed out that even though it might be unconscious, stereotypes do exist with student discipline, and teachers are more likely to highly discipline somebody who has an ethnic-sounding name than maybe someone who didn't. They said one way to reduce this bias is to give empathy training to teachers and make them conscious of their biases, or even just show them some of the data that shows what's happening with students who are getting suspended more, so that they can start being reflective about their actions. The next article was called Creating a Warm, Inclusive Classroom Environment. So this article basically stated that the way you set up your classroom really shapes how your students will feel throughout the year. They said that being intentional about the classroom design, your procedures, and strategies should be something that you always focus on. You want to build for student success, and you should be thinking about how this would make a student feel whenever you're trying to incorporate something new into your classroom. They also said that including small things like a classroom tradition, community meetings, something like that can really help build a feeling of community within your classroom. You're creating those memories together, and that makes you feel tighter, more closely knit. Teachers should teach conflict resolution, self-advocacy, and active listening skills. One way they suggested doing that was using literature, so like children's books or even young adult novels, short stories, to support student learning. The last article that we were given was called Strategies for Building a Productive and Positive Learning Environment. In this article, it said that you should strive to have an environment that encourages risk-taking and authentic conversations. Teachers should make learning relevant and have a code of conduct. Teachers should use positive behavior supports and reinforce them frequently, and that would help build student intrinsic motivation. And lastly, everything should be done with an air of positivity about it. Next half of the module, I looked up 4 different articles relating to bullying prevention or bullying in general. And so these are the studies that I found. I tried to use more scholarly articles just to get some more data involved here. My first article that I read was Students' Perspectives on Cyberbullying. So this study was done in 2007. So almost 10, 13 years ago. So it's an older article, but it shows that even then, secondary students particularly, were reporting cyberbullying to be a big problem. Statistically, you were seeing more females than males reporting cyberbullying as an issue. And in general, in 2007, students knew about cyberbullying. They knew some small strategies to take, but they didn't know how to reach out to adults, how to get the help they needed to fix cyberbullying. So that study just stated that cyberbullying needs to be taught in schools. So even though that's something we already know, I just thought it was interesting that even back in 2007, when things like social media weren't the big issue that they are now, we were still seeing students report cyberbullying as an issue. The next article I read was The Effectiveness of School-Based Bullying Prevention Programs. This article said that bullying is prevalent, obviously, and has many negative side effects for the victim, but also for the bullier, which I thought was interesting because we don't think about how bullying can affect the actual bully itself. Usually there's something deeper with them that needs help as well. So this was basically a study about studies. So they looked at 22 different small-scale studies and pooled all of that data together to make this big research document. And so they looked at 22 different studies. And in these 22 studies, they were focusing on schools that had used bullying prevention programs. Of those 22 studies, they said 50% of them saw positive effects. So it was a little vague on what that meant, but I think that just meant like overall their school culture felt better. However, 67% of the programs saw a reduction in victimization. So to me, that means that these students were feeling safer at school. They reported being bullied less, or if they were bullied, they knew how to stick up for themselves and advocate for themselves. One sad thing I thought was that programs were more effective if the classroom was homogeneous, so everybody was of the same race or the same income background. And that was especially prevalent in countries outside of the United States. They said bullying prevention wasn't as effective in the United States because we have so much diversity in our classrooms. So that makes me kind of sad, because I think diversity is what makes our classrooms great. And so seeing that that was a negative aspect of bullying prevention programs was kind of shocking when I read this research study. A third article I read was called Teacher Perceptions and Practices Regarding School Bullying Prevention. Again, this is an older study. It was done in 2009, but I picked it because it seemed really reflective of the teachers who I had in school's way of thinking, and maybe teachers who are still teaching today who might be considered more old school. And so I thought that this was maybe playing the devil's advocate card by choosing this article, but I thought it was very interesting. So this is a national study done in, like I said, 2009. They surveyed 359 teachers about anti-bullying practices. So of those 359, 86% said when there's a bullying problem, they just have serious talks with the bully and the victim. Only 31% set aside time to discuss bullying as a whole class. And most teachers were just stating that one-on-one conferencing and improved supervision will fix most of the bullying problems. So obviously, the people who did this study were disappointed that that's what was happening with the teachers in 2009. And it said that teachers needed more information on why school-wide bullying prevention was needed. I think in 2020 we would have a much better handle on this, and I think your data would be a lot different. But to me, this is interesting because as somebody who went through high school in the mid-2000s, I can see how these teachers' attitudes kind of played into my values with bullying too. I think if I hadn't gone through a teacher education program and learned about bullying and its issues, I would have probably been more dismissive about bullying and how it can affect kids. And so you just have to think that the parents today of students that I have, like in my middle school classroom, are people who went through school in the early 2000s, 2010s, who did not have teachers who took bullying seriously, who maybe the kids themselves didn't take it very seriously. And so their attitudes and values can be reflected on students today. And so we need to take the more progressive approach with being active interveners for bullying, and using that to teach our students so that the next generation, their kids, are more aware of bullying and what the effects are. Last article I picked was Engaging Youth in Bullying Prevention Through Community-Based Participatory Research, which is quite the mouthful. They just call it CBPR. So what CBPR is, they use community members to tackle bullying problems. So I liked this article a lot because it was all about getting your community involved and getting more advocates for students. What they did is, with a group, they would focus on the strengths of the community and their weaknesses, and then build a bullying prevention program from scratch. So instead of, implementing something new from like some type of curriculum, they would build it from the ground up based upon what the kids needed. Unfortunately, it wasn't widely used or researched yet. This study only had 3 elementary schools as a participant in it, and they were taught through 2nd through 5th grade kids. So I'd like to see this done on a much wider scale to see how effective it was, because I think it's valuable. It allows for multiple perspectives. You get community members involved. You get more people advocating for your kids. That's always a good thing. It wasn't perfect. Some of the data the researchers came up with on this study was kind of depressing, but one highlight that they did say was that students felt like they would be more believed about bullying, and that their peers and adults would stick up for them more if they were bullied. So nothing wrong with that. So this is just some summaries of the statistics of how and where. Bullying occurs. So nearly half of surveyed middle schoolers have experienced verbal bullying. About 1/3 of them have been physically bullied, and then about 30% say they've been psychologically bullied. I label it psychological bullying because this is something that affects them mentally. It may not be a verbal or a physical thing, but this is something that kind of gets in students' heads. So for me, psychological bullying includes theft, feeling like somebody's messing with your stuff, social isolation, verbal threats, any type of threat. Bullying can happen anywhere. Usually you're going to see it in unstructured times, but about 30% still takes place in the classroom. In this study, only 10% reported cyberbullying. I would say that's way higher now. I teach 100 middle schoolers. I would say if I asked them today, I would say about 50 of them would say they're being cyberbullied or have been in the last year. So I really feel like that data is not accurate anymore, but that's kind of changing with the times. So here's some ideas I have for bullying prevention strategies. Some of them are just my thoughts. Some of them are research-based. Obviously, school-wide bullying prevention programs are effective and can be used successfully. You need to increase your staff supervision, especially during unstructured settings, and that will go a long way to reducing some of the bullying. You need to build an environment of safety and respect and understand your community factors and what's going on with your kids and your demographics. Use empathy when looking at student discipline, and then just evaluating for discipline bias when you're going through your records each year. PBIS is a great strategy to use to get kids motivated and to make them feel like they're important in your school. So that would be a good way to help reduce bullying. You need to continue to make learning relevant and then include multicultural perspectives in your curriculum. I think this allows students to learn more about the kids around them, notice that their differences really aren't that different, and makes them more aware and ready to be global participants. Effectiveness, hopefully this reduces school bullying. It allows for an increase in standards, speaking out to bullies, and there's a more supportive school environment. When your learning is relevant and you feel like people care about you, students are going to be more intrinsically motivated, and the emotional well-being of both your students and your staff hopefully improves. Like I said, it would prepare students to be global citizens. They would be more well-educated. They would know about cultures around them and feel better about themselves that way. And then another great benefit is that by looking at discipline bias, you could have reduced suspension rates for minorities, increased attendance, and therefore graduation rates. So here are the resources I used. This includes the 4 articles that were given to us within the module and the 4 articles that I found myself, not necessarily in that order though, of course. So hopefully you learned a little bit by watching this module. Thank you.